Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where the mist clings to the trees and the night stretches darker than anywhere else, there are stories that locals refuse to tell after sunset. Whispers of phantom figures, cursed cabins, screaming rocks, and creatures that stalk the ridges. These are not just campfire tales. They are warnings passed down for generations about the dangers that still lurk in the mountains today. Tonight, we'll uncover 8 of the most disturbing true horror stories from the Appalachian Mountains. But be warned, once you hear them, you may never look at these mountains the same way again. They told me never to walk alone in the woods after dark in Logan County. Not because of wild animals, or because I might get lost, but because of him, the logger, who never came back. Folks said his ghost still roamed the ridges, axe in hand, searching for what killed him. I laughed when I first heard it. But laughter doesn't come so easy now. My name is David Rains, 40 years old, freelance journalist from Charleston, West Virginia. In late September 2020, I traveled to Logan County for a feature article on the decline of the timber industry. Logging had once been the backbone of the region, but companies had pulled out, leaving scars on the land and ghost towns scattered in the hollows. I thought I'd write a piece about economic hardship and forgotten workers. What I found instead was a story I'll never publish in the paper. I stayed at a small inn outside Man, West Virginia. The innkeeper, a wiry man named George, warned me when I mentioned hiking the old logging roads. "Be careful out there," he said. "Some men never left those woods. Some say they still swing their axes, even after death." He told me the tale of a logger named Silas Mercer, a man who worked the ridges back in the 1930s. One autumn evening, Silas went into the forest with his crew and never returned. The others found his axe buried deep in a stump, but no trace of his body. From then on, strange things were reported, echoing footsteps, the ring of steel on wood where no one was cutting, and a shadowy figure glimpsed among the trees. I brushed it off as folklore. Appalachia is rich with ghost stories, and every hollow seems to have one. Still, there was a tightness in George's voice when he spoke, a kind of sincerity that clings to you. The next morning, I hiked one of the abandoned roads. The forest had begun reclaiming it, with moss creeping over the gravel and saplings pushing through cracks. The air smelled of wet leaves and pine pitch. My boots crunched loudly, the only sound in the hushed expanse. Every so often, I came across relics of the past, rusting chains, a broken saw blade, the skeleton of a timber skidder half swallowed by vines. By mid-afternoon, clouds thickened, casting the woods in gray. That's when I first heard it, the sound of chopping. It was faint, rhythmic, echoing through the hollow. Chop, pause, chop, the cadence of an axe biting into wood. I stopped, straining my ears. It couldn't be another hiker. I hadn't seen anyone all day, and no company logged here anymore. My throat went dry. I told myself it was an echo, maybe some distant construction, but the sound was too close, too clear. Against my better judgment, I followed it. The deeper I went, the stronger the smell of damp earth and old wood became. The chopping grew louder, sharper, until I was sure I would see someone just beyond the next bend. But when I stepped into the clearing, there was nothing. Only a half-rotted stump, split clean down the middle, as if struck moments ago. I reached out and touched the wood. It was cold, damp, no sap, no fresh splinters. And yet, the cut was sharp, unnaturally clean for something so old. A shiver crawled up my spine. The air grew heavier then, pressing on my chest. I had the sensation of being watched. Every rustle of leaves made me spin, my heart hammering. But I saw nothing, just the endless ranks of trees, their trunks dark in the dim light. I forced myself back to the road, trying to shake the feeling. But as the day bled into dusk, the woods seemed to change. The colors drained to dull gray. The wind picked up, carrying the faintest scent of smoke and sweat, like the ghost of a logging campfire. And then I heard footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, pacing me through the trees to my right. I stopped. They stopped. I walked again, faster, and so did they, matching my stride. My breath came ragged. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I swung it toward the sound. The beam caught only trunks and brush. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking. The woods swallowed my words. Then, from deeper in the trees, came a groan. Low, human, pained. Panic surged through me. I stumbled down the road, half running now, the shadows thickening around me. That's when I saw him. At first, just a shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, standing among the trees. His clothes were ragged, old-fashioned, like overalls bleached pale with age. In his hand, an axe glinted faintly in the dying light. "Hey!" I shouted, though my voice betrayed my fear. "Who's there?" The figure didn't move. I stepped closer, heart pounding. My flashlight beam landed on him. His face, or what should have been his face, was a blur, featureless, like mist shaped into a man. Yet the weight of his gaze bore into me all the same. The axe lifted slowly, deliberately, as though he meant to strike. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the light. "Stay away." I yelled, but my words sounded weak, swallowed by the night. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. One moment there, the next only trees. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. No insects, no wind, nothing but my own ragged breathing. I ran. I don't remember how I found my way back to the inn. The forest seemed endless, the road twisting in circles, but somehow I burst into the clearing where I parked my car. I slammed the door, locked it, and didn't stop shaking until I reached the glow of town. That night, I dreamed of him. I heard the rhythmic chop of his axe, echoing in the dark. When I woke, sweat-soaked and trembling, I swore I smelled fresh-cut pine in my room. The next morning, George looked at me like he already knew. "You saw him," he said flatly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He told me Silas Mercer had been a hard man, a loner even among loggers. Some said he fell to an accident, crushed by a tree. Others claimed the crew turned on him in a drunken fight. The truth was buried with him, or never buried at all. "That's why he walks," George said. "He ain't at peace. He never will be." I left Logan County that day. I told myself I'd finish the article later, from a safe distance. But every time I sit down to write, my hands tremble. I hear the axe. Chop, pause, chop. Sometimes, late at night, when my house is quiet, I catch the faint sound again, threading through the silence. And sometimes, just before sleep takes me, I see him at the edge of my vision, broad shoulders, axe in hand, faceless but watching. I don't know why he showed himself to me. I don't know if it was a warning or a claim. But I do know this. If you walk the old roads of Logan County after dark, and you hear the axe, don't follow the sound. Don't look for him. Because once the phantom logger notices you, he'll never stop watching. They told me not to drive Pine Mountain after dark. I thought it was just another mountain town superstition, the kind of tale locals tell to keep strangers from wandering into the hollers. But when the road itself seemed to vanish beneath my tires, and I realized I wasn't alone out there, I understood that Pine Mountain wasn't just a place, it was a trap. My name is Daniel Kerr. I'm 36 years old, a surveyor for a construction company based in Lexington, Kentucky. I'd been assigned to scout rural routes in the southeastern part of the state, mapping potential access roads for future development. It was late October, just a week before Halloween, and the hills were alive with autumn. The trees burned with color orange, crimson, and deep gold, yet the deeper I drove, the less warmth I felt. Shadows seemed to cling to the corners of the woods like something alive. By the time I finished my work in Harlan County, the sun had already slipped behind the ridge. Locals at a gas station had warned me, almost casually, "Don't take Pine Mountain Road at night. Folks go up there. Sometimes they don't come back." They laughed when they said it, but there was no humor in their eyes. I brushed it off as folklore, the kind of story born from isolation and too many dark nights. But I was running behind schedule, and Pine Mountain Road cut nearly an hour off my drive. I told myself it was nothing but an old mountain legend, and I turned onto the road just as the last streaks of daylight drained away. The pavement was cracked and narrow, winding upward through dense forest. My headlights carved out a thin tunnel of visibility, the rest swallowed in shadow. The silence out there was suffocating. Even the crickets seemed muted. The smell of wet leaves and pine needles seeped into the car. I remember adjusting the radio just for noise, but all I got was static, sharp and broken, like whispers cutting through a bad connection. About 15 minutes in, I noticed something strange. The road ahead seemed to ripple. At first, I thought it was fog, but as I drove closer, the surface shimmered like water disturbed by wind. My gut tightened, but I pressed on. When my tires touched it, the car jolted not like hitting a pothole, but like the ground itself shifted beneath me. The road behind me was gone. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw nothing but trees. No pavement, no headlights bouncing back. Just forest pressing close, as if the road had never been there. My chest clenched as panic set in. I slammed the brakes and threw the car in reverse, but the tires spun on dirt and leaves. The asphalt had vanished completely. The only option was forward. The further I drove, the more wrong everything felt. The trees looked different taller. Their branches knotted together overhead, blocking out even the stars. The air smelled metallic, like rust and rain. My ears popped as if the pressure had changed, and every breath felt heavy, labored. That's when I saw the first figure. He stood on the side of the road, half hidden in the trees. A man in old work clothes, his suspenders hanging loose, his hat low over his face. Relief washed over me. I wasn't alone. I slowed down, rolled the window halfway, and called out, "Hey, you all right out here?" The man didn't move. He just stood there, head tilted slightly, watching me. My headlights caught his face, or what should have been his face. It was smooth, featureless, like pale clay. No eyes, no mouth. I hit the gas before my brain even caught up with my body. The figure disappeared into the trees in my side mirror, swallowed by the dark. The road twisted tighter as it climbed. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. Every curve revealed more figures along the roadside, women in long dresses, children standing hand in hand, all with that same blank face turned toward me. They didn't move. They didn't breathe. They just watched. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to break free. Legends I'd read in passing flooded my memory. Stories of Pine Mountain swallowing travelers whole, of a disappearing road that led somewhere not meant for the living. Old-timers claimed the road belonged to the dead, a path between this world and the next. If you drove it after dark, you might never find your way back. The air grew colder, my breath fogging the windshield despite the heater blasting. The smell of rot filled the car, thick and sour, making me gag. The radio hissed louder, fragments of voices breaking through. I swear, I heard my name whisper Daniel. Daniel. Then, the headlights illuminated something ahead. A wooden sign, hand-painted, its letters smeared and crooked. Turn back. I slowed to a crawl, pulse pounding in my temples. The figures were closer now, edging toward the road. For the first time, they moved jerky, unnatural steps, their bodies twitching like marionettes pulled by tangled strings. I pressed harder on the gas, but the road seemed to stretch endlessly, every curve looping back into more of the same. My phone vibrated in the queue folder, startling me. I snatched it up, desperate for connection. No bars, just a single notification that shouldn't have been possible. New voicemail. Hands shaking, I played it. The message was only 5 seconds long. It was my own voice, gasping, whispering, "Don't let them in." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. My eyes flicked to the passenger seat. For a split second, I thought I saw someone sitting there, a blank-faced figure staring straight ahead. I jerked the wheel, swerving so hard, I nearly went off the edge of the mountain. When I looked back, the seat was empty. At some point, I must have blacked out, whether from fear, exhaustion, or something the mountain did. I don't know. The next thing I remember is waking up at dawn, my car parked on a gravel turnout halfway down Pine Mountain. The road behind me was perfectly normal pavement, stretching down into the valley, no sign of the forest swallowing it whole. I drove straight home without stopping, without looking back. It's been 3 weeks, but Pine Mountain hasn't let me go. At night, I hear footsteps circling my bed. My phone buzzes with voicemails. I don't remember recording each one in my own voice, warning me of things I haven't yet seen. And sometimes, when I look out the window, the street outside my apartment is gone, replaced by endless trees pressing in close, waiting for me to take the road again. I don't think I escaped that night. I think Pine Mountain followed me home. I was warned not to stay in that cabin. Every local I spoke to in Johnson County, Tennessee, told me the same thing. Snake Hollow Road isn't a place you spend the night unless you want company you didn't invite. I thought they were exaggerating, the way small towns build legends to keep outsiders at bay. But by the time the first set of footsteps echoed through the cabin, when I knew damn well I was alone, I realized the stories were not only true, they didn't even tell the half of it. My name is Aaron Blake. I'm 32, a freelance writer who specializes in folklore and forgotten towns across Appalachia. I came to Tennessee in October, chasing an assignment about abandoned roads and ghost stories that cling to the edges of the mountains like moss on stone. Snake Hollow Road was at the top of the list. The legend was simple enough. A cabin where no one could sleep through the night because something or someone walked the floors after dark. The drive up was treacherous. The road was barely more than a jagged line of gravel curling through thick forest. Leaves clung to the windshield like red and gold stains, and the skeletal branches arched over the car as if they were waiting to close in. The air smelled of wet earth and rotting wood, heavy and damp. I remember gripping the wheel tightly, the silence of the woods pressing in so hard that I turned the radio up just to feel less smothered. When the cabin came into view, my stomach sank. It looked older than I expected, its timbers blackened with rot, the front porch sagging as if the whole thing might collapse under its own weight. A single chimney leaned to one side, capped with vines. The windows were clouded over, as though time itself had breathed across the glass. It wasn't just abandoned, it looked forgotten. Inside, the smell hit me first. Mold, dust, and something metallic like old blood that had seeped into the wood. The floorboards creaked with every step I took, echoing into the emptiness. The furniture was sparse an iron bed frame in one corner, a wooden rocking chair, and a table missing one leg propped against the wall. I set my backpack down, trying to convince myself that it was just a cabin, nothing more. But the air was thick in my throat, and the shadows in the corners seemed to pulse when I wasn't looking directly at them. By the time night fell, the forest outside had grown impossibly dark. No moonlight penetrated the canopy. It was as if the cabin had been swallowed by the mountain itself. I sat at the table with my lantern burning, jotting notes in my journal. That was when I heard it, the sound of footsteps. At first, I thought it was outside, crunching softly over fallen leaves, circling the porch. My skin prickled as I held my breath and listened. Slow, heavy, pacing back and forth. Then silence. I stood and pressed my ear to the wall, heart thudding. Nothing. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was a deer or maybe a raccoon. But then, with the lantern flickering, the footsteps started again inside the cabin. They began at the far end of the room, near the bedframe. I spun around, my breath caught in my chest. The sound was deliberate, weight pressing down on the old boards one step at a time, but the room was empty. I could see every corner. Nothing moved. Still, the footsteps came closer. I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice cracked in the stillness. No answer. Only the steady approach of invisible feet, until they stopped just a few feet from me. The lantern's flame hissed as though choked by unseen breath, then steadied again. I forced myself to sit back down, trembling as I tried to keep writing, but my hand shook so badly the words were illegible. Hours passed like that, silence broken by sudden footsteps that would start in one corner, cross the floor, then vanish. Sometimes they would come right up behind me, so close that I swore I could feel the vibration through the wood. Around midnight, I thought I heard whispering. It came from the walls, faint at first, like the breeze slipping through cracks. But the longer I listened, the more it sounded like voices low, murmuring, overlapping, as though a group of people were crowded into the cabin, speaking just below comprehension. I pressed my palms against my ears and shook my head, but the whispers didn't stop. I remembered what one of the locals told me in town earlier that day. An old man at the diner leaned across the counter, his eyes clouded with cataracts, and said, "That cabin don't belong to the living. Back in '34, a family vanished there. Husband, wife, 2 little ones. Folks said they were running shine and crossed the wrong people. Blood was spilled, but the bodies never turned up. Place has been walking ever since. I thought it was nothing more than rural folklore meant to spook outsiders. But now, alone in that cabin, the weight of his words pressed down on me." The footsteps resumed. This time, they didn't stop. They circled me, faster and faster, like someone pacing in a rage. The whispers rose to a hiss, and then the rocking chair in the corner moved. It swayed forward and back, wood groaning, though no one sat in it. My throat closed as fear rooted me in place. Then the lantern went out. Darkness swallowed me whole. I scrambled for my phone, fumbling with numb fingers until the screen's pale glow lit the room. That was when I saw it, a shadow that wasn't mine. It stretched across the wall, tall and twisted, hunched like a man but elongated, its limbs too long, its head bent at an unnatural angle. And though it loomed inches from me, there was no one standing there. My body moved before my mind caught up. I grabbed my bag, yanked the door open, and bolted into the night. The cold air hit me like a slap. I didn't stop running until the cabin was nothing but a black shape swallowed by the trees. Even then, a sound of footsteps followed me down the road, keeping pace though I saw no one. I spent the rest of the night in my car, locked tight with the engine running. Every so often, the windows fogged as though something was breathing against the glass. I refused to look. When the first light of dawn finally broke through the treetops, I drove away without a second thought. It's been weeks since that night, but I can't shake it. I still hear footsteps in my apartment sometimes, circling my bed as I try to sleep. I tell myself it's my imagination, that fear has left a scar on my mind. But last night, as I lay awake, I heard the floorboards creak just inches from me. I don't know if I ever truly left Snake Hollow Road, and I don't think whatever was in that cabin ever let me go. They warned me never to hike Mount Rogers after dark, not because of bears or coyotes, but because of something older, something darker, that prowled when the sun slipped behind the Blue Ridge. They called it the Black Wolf, a shadow the size of a horse, with eyes that glowed like coals. I didn't believe the stories, not then. But that night in October, when I stayed too long on the trail, I learned why people in Grayson County keep their doors bolted after sundown. My name is Daniel Price. I'm 31, a park ranger based in Marion, Virginia. I've worked these trails for 6 years, leading day hikes, doing routine maintenance, keeping an eye out for hunters who don't belong. Mount Rogers is the tallest peak in Virginia, and it has a way of swallowing time-dense spruce forests, sudden meadows, fog that rolls in without warning. That day I was doing a solo sweep, making sure no campers were overstaying in the backcountry before the weather turned. The sun was already low when I realized I'd misjudged my pace. By the time I hit the saddle just below the summit, the light had drained into gray, and the woods had gone quiet in that way that makes the hair on your arms lift. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not just a fading of bird calls or the hush of wind. It was absolute, like a blanket had been thrown over the forest. My boots crunched against frost-stiff grass, and even that sounded wrong, muffled. The air smelled metallic, like wet stone mixed with the copper tang of blood. My pulse picked up as I told myself it was just altitude, just nerves, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something was watching me. I remembered the stories then. Old-timers in the nearby towns spoke of a wolf too large to be real, with fur blacker than night, seen only when the moon rose. They said it wasn't a natural beast, but a curse left by the Cherokee when they were driven from these mountains. A guardian-turned monster, doomed to roam till the land itself forgave. Most dismissed it as folklore, but others swore they'd seen its eyes burning between the trees. I tightened the strap of my pack and pushed forward, determined not to spook myself. The trail bent through a grove of spruce, the branches clawing at my jacket, and that's when I heard it. A low, rolling growl. It wasn't far off either. It vibrated in my chest like distant thunder. I froze, scanning with my flashlight. The beam cut through mist, illuminating tree trunks slick with moss, but nothing moved. The growl came again, this time from the other side, deeper, hungrier. My throat went dry. I told myself it was a bear, maybe a coyote, but no bear sounds like that. I started walking faster, boots crunching, breath fogging in sharp bursts. The trail spilled into an open bald, and I nearly gasped at the sight. Across the clearing, just at the edge of the trees, 2 eyes glowed red. Not the green reflection of deer, not the pale flicker of foxes, but burning red like live embers. They were set too high, too far apart to be any animal I knew. The creature stepped forward. It was massive, easily shoulder-high to a horse, its body rippling with muscle beneath fur so black it seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight. Its head was lupin, but wrong, the muzzle too long, the teeth too many, each glistening like wet ivory. Saliva dripped onto the grass, hissing as though it burned the earth. The smell hit me then. Wet fur, rot, and iron, thick enough to make me gag. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs locked. The black wolf padded closer, silent except for the rasp of its breath. Its eyes fixed on me, not like prey, but like a trespasser. I fumbled for my radio, whispering a call sign, but the speaker only spat static. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I stood in near darkness with only those burning eyes staring at me. Then it lunged, not at me, past me. It streaked across the clearing with impossible speed, vanishing into the trees behind me. I spun, light swinging wildly, but there was nothing. Only the echo of its growl, fading like a storm, receding down the valley. My chest heaved, sweat soaking my shirt despite the cold. I wanted to believe it was gone, but I knew better. The rest of the descent was a blur. Every few minutes, I heard branches snapping just off the trail, a shadow sliding between trunks. Once, I caught its shape keeping pace with me on a ridgeline, massive against the moonlight. I tried not to look, tried not to acknowledge it, but the weight of its gaze never lifted. When I finally reached the trailhead, the night had deepened. My truck sat alone under the stars, frost glinting on its roof. I sprinted the last stretch, fumbling with the keys, heart hammering. As I slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door, I allowed myself one last glance at the tree line. There it was. The black wolf stood in the shadows, half in mist, half in moonlight, its eyes locked on mine. Its chest heaved with slow, steady breaths, and its teeth glinted as it lowered its head. Then, with a ripple of muscle, it melted back into the forest, leaving only silence in its wake. I drove off without looking back, headlights cutting through fog that seemed thicker than before. When I got home, I tried to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, exhaustion, some large stray dog warped by fear. But deep down I knew the truth. I had seen the guardian turned curse, the black wolf of Mount Rogers. And even now, weeks later, I hear it. Late at night, when I step outside for air, the wind carries a growl low and rolling from the hills. Sometimes my dog refuses to leave the porch, ears flat, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. Sometimes I wake to find claw marks on the dirt road leading past my house, each print too large to belong to anything natural. I haven't gone back to Mount Rogers since that night. But the worst part is the feeling that the black wolf didn't stay there. It followed me, marked me, and is waiting for the night I find myself alone again under the trees. And when that night comes, I know it won't just pass me by. They told me never to go into the old hospital in Welch after dark. Not because of squatters, not because of falling ceilings or broken glass, but because something was supposed to walk those halls that hadn't been human in a very long time. I laughed when I first heard it, just another Appalachian ghost story, meant to scare kids away from dangerous places. But last fall, when I stepped inside that abandoned hospital myself, I learned there are some places where the walls remember every scream, and once you hear them, you can't unhear them. My name is Eric Collins. I'm 36, a freelance photographer living in Charleston, West Virginia. I specialize in urban exploration photos, ruins, forgotten buildings, empty factories reclaimed by vines and dust. They sell well online, and I've made a modest living chasing decay across the state. That's what drew me to Welch. I'd read about the old McDowell County Hospital, shuttered for decades, windows blown out, gurneys still rotting in the halls. I figured I'd spend a couple of hours there one evening, catch the last of the fall light streaming through the broken windows, then head back before it got too dark. The place loomed above the town, like a corpse that refused to sink into the ground. 4 stories of brick and crumbling stone, vines clawing their way up the facade, windows black and gaping. The moment I stepped out of my car, the air changed. Welch already has that coal town heaviness, like the mountains press the sky closer to you. But here it felt thicker, heavier, almost chemical. I could smell mildew, iron, and something faintly sweet like old antiseptic seeping from the walls. I stepped through a side entrance where the door had been ripped off its hinges. My flashlight cut through the dust motes, swirling like ashes in the stale air. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not quiet silence. No insects, no breeze through broken panes, just my boots scuffing tile and the low creak of a building shifting under its own decay. The smell of mold was overwhelming, mixed with rust and that lingering sweetness that made my throat tighten. The halls stretched on in both directions, lined with peeling paint and wheelchairs, frozen like corpses in mid-motion. Faded murals of flowers and sunshine decorated one wall, painted long ago to cheer children who never walked out of this place. My camera clicked, the sound unnervingly loud in the hollow space. Each flash lit the hall for a split second, and in those instants, I swore I saw movement shadows retreating around corners, figures just out of frame. I told myself it was my imagination. I pressed on, climbing the central staircase where the railing was slick with rust. Each step echoed, but sometimes there was a second echo, one that came half a beat later, as if something were walking just behind me. My skin prickled, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the stairwell was always empty. On the second floor, I found the operating rooms. The walls were lined with shattered tiles, and rusted surgical lamps dangled from the ceiling like broken necks. The smell here was stronger, not just mold and rust, but something sharper ozone, like the sting of burned wiring. My flashlight beam swept across a metal table, its surface stained dark, and for an instant I could have sworn the stain was wet, glistening. When I blinked, it was dry rust again. I set up my camera on a tripod, aiming down the corridor to catch the vanishing light. That's when I heard it. A soft shuffle, like slippers dragging across tile. My breath caught in my chest. The sound came from the far end of the hall, steady, deliberate. I called out, my voice cracking. "Hello? Someone there?" My words fell flat, swallowed by the walls. The shuffling stopped. I stood frozen, heart pounding, every muscle screaming at me to leave. Then came the crying. Soft, low at first, like a woman weeping into her hands. The sound rolled down the corridor, echoing, filling every room. My skin went cold. I'd heard about this in a local folklore. The crying nurse, they called her. Supposedly, she was on duty the night a fire broke out in the 60s. Smoke filled the ward, and she stayed behind, trying to save patients who couldn't move. They said she died clawing at locked doors, her sobs echoing long after the flames burned out. I wanted to run, but my legs carried me forward instead. The crying grew louder, more desperate. I whispered to myself that it was just wind in the broken windows, just the building settling, but my gut knew better. My flashlight beam flicked across the hall, catching glimpses of old IV stands, shattered gurneys, doors hanging half off their hinges. Then it landed on something that made my blood freeze. A figure stood at the far end, not fully formed, more like a smudge of shadow, shaped like a woman. Her shoulders shook as if she were sobbing, her face buried in her hands. My throat went dry. I raised my flashlight higher, but the beam seemed to bend away from her, as if light itself refused to touch. She lifted her head. There were no eyes, no mouth, just a hollow blur where a face should be. And though her form was nothing but shadow, I could feel her looking at me, straight through me. The sobs turned into a high, keening wail that pierced my skull. My camera on the tripod clicked on its own, flash bursting, capturing images I knew I'd never want to look at. I stumbled backward, tripping over a broken gurney, my flashlight clattering to the floor. The beam spun wildly, catching fragments walls streaked with handprints, wheelchairs slowly turning as if pushed, doors slamming shut with no one near them. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing my light, and bolted for the stairs. The crying followed. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was inside me, vibrating in my chest cavity, in my teeth. My vision blurred, and I could smell smoke now, thick and acrid, though the air was clear. Every step I took down the stairwell, it felt like hands brushed my shoulders, cold and damp. At one point, I swear, I heard someone whisper right against my ear, "Don't leave me." I burst out through the side entrance, lungs heaving, the night air cutting sharp and clean into me. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. When I slammed the door shut, the crying finally cut off, leaving a ringing silence in its place. I drove all night back to Charleston, every hair on my arms standing up the whole way. When I got home, I dumped my camera onto the desk, swearing I'd never go through those photos. But curiosity gnawed at me. A week later, I gave in and opened the memory card. Most of the shots were ruined by motion blur or dust. But in several, there she was standing at the end of the hall, face blurred into nothing, her hands reaching toward the lens. I deleted every image, but the sound of her crying still lingers. Sometimes, late at night, when my apartment is dead quiet, I hear it again, soft, distant, like it's coming from down the hall. And when I look through my viewfinder now, when I raise the camera to my eye, there are moments when I see her. Not in front of me, not in the room, but just behind the glass. Always watching, always weeping, waiting for me to come back. And the worst part is, some nights, I think I hear myself answering her. I grew up being told there were things you shouldn't look for in the Appalachian Mountains after sundown, and Clinch Mountain was always at the top of that list. Folks in Russell County whispered about shapes that followed hunters home, about voices that spoke when no one was around, about figures darker than the night itself lingering at the tree line. As a child, I thought it was just folklore, just warnings to keep kids from wandering too far. But when I became a park ranger and had to patrol those ridges alone, I learned that some legends don't just stick around, they watch you. My name is Daniel Hayes, 33 years old, born and raised in Southwest Virginia. I took the ranger job partly because I knew these woods like the back of my hand, or at least I thought I did. It was late October when the incident happened, the air sharp with the smell of wood smoke from cabins down in the hollows. The leaves were bright fire-colored in the day, but when dusk crept in, the forest swallowed every hint of warmth. I was scheduled for a late patrol that evening, checking the boundary trails near Clinch Mountain. I remember thinking I'd finish quick, head home, and catch a ball game on TV. Instead, I ended up learning why old-timers never stayed up there past dark. The first thing that struck me was how quickly the silence came. Usually, even at night, you hear crickets, owls, maybe the rustle of deer. But as soon as I turned up the ridge trail, it was like the woods exhaled and went hollow. My boots crunched the gravel path, but nothing answered back. I smelled the dampness of leaves decomposing, the faint sour tang of mushrooms, and something else like wet ash, though there hadn't been a fire up there in weeks. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe, the way it feels just before a storm. I told myself it was nothing. I'd been trained to keep calm, to think logically. But when I reached the clearing near the old fire tower, I saw it. At first, it looked like my own shadow stretched long across the ground from my flashlight beam. But I realized the angle was wrong. The figure was standing at the edge of the trees, tall, thin, darker than the night around it. No light caught on it, no outline of clothes or features, just a solid cutout of black. I froze. My first instinct was to call out maybe some trespasser, some prankster in dark clothes, but my throat clamped shut. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. I felt my skin prickle, my pulse hammer in my ears. The smell of ash grew stronger, like burning timber left to smolder. I shifted my flashlight slightly, and for a split second, I thought I saw eyes, not glowing but reflecting faintly, the way a fox's might. Then they were gone. I backed away slowly, telling myself to get to the truck, to report it. Every step I took, the figure seemed closer, though I never saw it move. One blink it was 20 feet away, and next it stood at the base of the fire tower. My light flickered, dimmed, and went out completely. Panic clawed through me. I fumbled for the spare battery, my hands trembling so hard I dropped it in the leaves. The darkness was absolute, pressing against me, and I swore I could hear faint breathing right beside my ear. When the beam finally flickered back on, the clearing was empty. My chest heaved with relief, but it didn't last. Because just then, I remembered something my grandfather once said. He used to tell me stories about the Watcher of Clinch, said it wasn't a ghost. Not exactly, but a shadow left over from someone who died wrong miners, buried alive. A hunter who vanished in a blizzard. No one was sure. All they knew was that it didn't like being noticed. Don't look at it too long, he'd told me once. If you do, it starts looking back. I stumbled down the trail, flashlight darting wildly from tree to tree. Every so often, I caught glimpses of shape slipping behind a trunk, a stretch of shadow where none should be. My boots snagged on roots, my breath turned ragged. I tried humming under my breath, the way I used to when I was a kid afraid of the dark, but my voice cracked, breaking the silence like glass. Halfway down the ridge, I realized the woods weren't just quiet, they were echoing. My own footsteps came back at me a half-second later, as if someone else was following just behind. I stopped, and the echo stopped. My breath clouded in the cold air, but another puff hung behind me, not mine. My skin crawled. I didn't dare turn around, but my eyes watered with the need to look. Finally, I broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. My flashlight beam bounced wildly, catching glimpses of black where no shadow should be. I didn't care about noise, didn't care if I twisted an ankle. I just needed to get out. When I finally burst into the gravel parking area, I nearly sobbed with relief seeing my truck sitting there. I yanked the door open, dove inside, and jammed the key into the ignition. The headlights flared to life, illuminating the trail entrance. For the briefest moment, I saw it again, standing just beyond the beam, tall and still. Then the light blinked, and it was gone. I peeled out of there, gravel spitting, my heart hammering so hard I thought I'd black out. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape, darker than darkness, waiting. I told myself it was stress, fatigue, tricks of the eye. But the next morning, when I checked my uniform, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The fabric of my sleeve smelled faintly of smoke-wet ash, just like in the clearing. And though my flashlight batteries had been replaced, the beam still flickered, as if something had drained it. I haven't gone back up Clinch Mountain since that night. When my coworkers asked why, I just said I didn't feel right about it. They laughed, said I'd finally let the old ghost stories get to me. But sometimes, when I'm driving home late, I catch something in my rearview mirror. A tall shadow standing just at the tree line, watching. Always watching. And deep down, I know one thing my grandfather never told me. It doesn't just stay on the mountain. Once you've looked at it, really seen it, it follows. I was warned not to camp near the gap. The ranger at the visitor center in Middlesboro, Kentucky, leaned across the counter when I mentioned my plan. His voice dropped to a hush, and his eyes darted to the window as if someone might overhear. People say the rocks scream at night, he told me. If you hear it, don't answer. Don't call back. Just leave. At the time, I laughed it off. My name is Mark Talbot, 32, a history teacher from Knoxville, Tennessee. I'd taken a week off in late October of 2021 to explore Cumberland Gap National Historical Park. I had always been fascinated by early settlers and the wilderness they carved through. The Gap was the doorway west, Daniel Boone's trail. It held history in its cliffs and caves. And as someone who'd grown tired of fluorescent lights and classroom walls, I craved the solitude of those ancient mountains. I carried my gear up a ridge trail, the air cool with the promise of winter. Leaves, fiery orange and red, crunched beneath my boots. The forest smelled of damp earth and pine resin, sharp and clean. The higher I climbed, the quieter the world became. Bird songs faded, replaced by the distant rush of wind funneled through the valleys. By late afternoon, I found a ledge overlooking the gap. It was breathtaking, rolling ridges fading into blue mist, the horizon stretching endless. I pitched my small tent near a formation of boulders that jutted like teeth from the earth. Locals called them the Screaming Rocks, though I didn't know the full story then. The first sign something was off came just after dusk. As I cooked a small meal over my portable stove, I noticed the stillness, No insects hummed, no owls hooted. Even the wind seemed to pause. I told myself it was the altitude, the thinning forest, but deep down I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my neck. When the sun finally slipped behind the ridges, the darkness came fast and absolute. I sat by the faint glow of my stove, jotting notes in my journal about Boone's Passage when it started. A sound. It was faint at first, a low moan threading through the rocks behind me. I froze, pen in midair. It rose slowly, stretching into a whale-raw, ragged, full of pain. My chest tightened. It wasn't the wind. I've heard the wind howl through canyons. I've camped near caves that whistled in drafts. This was different. It was a human voice, shrieking in agony. The hair on my arm stood up, and for a moment I couldn't move. Then instinct kicked in. I killed the stove, doused the tiny flame, and crouched in the dark, listening. The scream faded, echoing down the ridges, until silence pressed in once more. I told myself it must have been an animal, a bobcat maybe. They can sound eerily human. But then it came again, louder, closer. It ripped through the rocks, bouncing around me, impossible to place. It was as if the stone itself was screaming. My gut twisted with terror, and I fumbled for my flashlight, flicking it on. The beam stabbed through the dark, illuminating only gray stone and skeletal trees. Nothing moved. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint cries, rising and falling, like tortured souls trapped in the cliffs. In the morning, with sunlight breaking through the mist, it was easier to rationalize. The forest looked ordinary, golden leaves shimmering in the breeze. I forced myself to believe it had been the wind or some nocturnal animal. Still, unease gnawed at me. Later that day, while filling my water bottle at a ranger station, I asked another ranger, a woman in her 50s, with a sun-beaten face, about the screaming rocks. She went quiet, then finally said, "Some things here don't rest easy." She told me the stories, how native tribes once believed spirits haunted the gap, warning travelers of danger. How early settlers heard cries at night and took them as omens of death. And how, during the Civil War, soldiers were slaughtered in ambushes along those cliffs, their dying screams echoing in the stone. "Folks still go missing out there," she said. "Not often, but enough. You hear it, you leave." That's the rule. That night, against every ounce of reason, I stayed. Part of me was terrified. Another part, the stubborn part that needed answers, wanted to prove it was nothing more than wind. As twilight bled across the ridges, I sat by the rocks again. The forest fell silent in that same unnatural way, and my stomach turned with dread. Then it started. The scream ripped through the air, high-pitched, piercing, raw. I clenched my hands over my ears, but it still burrowed into my skull. My flashlight shook in my grip as I swung it wildly across the rocks. For a moment, I swore I saw a face in the stone, a pale, twisted visage, mouth open in eternal anguish. When I blinked, it was gone. The scream shifted, multiplying. It wasn't one voice now, it was dozens. Men, women, children, all crying out in torment. The sound came from everywhere, above, below, inside the rock itself. My legs trembled. I wanted to run, but the forest around me seemed alive, watching, waiting. Then something else happened. A whisper, beneath the screams, faint, insistent. My name, Mark. My blood turned to ice. I staggered back from the rocks, heart pounding. No one knew me here. No one should have known my name. The air thickened with the smell iron and smoke, like old blood and burned wood. My throat closed and bile rose in my mouth. I don't remember grabbing my pack. I don't remember half running, half stumbling down the trail. All I remember is the screams following me, chasing me down the mountain, until at last the forest spat me out into the safety of my truck's headlights. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached Knoxville. I haven't been back since. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my classroom grading papers, or lying in bed with the window cracked open, I swear I hear it again. A faint cry rising from nowhere, threading through the silence. And sometimes, when I let my guard down, I hear the whisper, soft as breath against my ear. Mark, I don't know what dwells in those rocks. Spirits of the dead, echoes of suffering, or something older, something bound in the mountain itself. What I do know is this. The gap holds its secrets in stone, and the stones remember every drop of blood spilled there. If you ever camp near the screaming rocks, and you hear the voices rise at night, don't do what I did. Don't listen. Don't linger. Don't call back. Because once the rocks know your name, they never let it go. I had heard whispers about the cabin long before I ever laid eyes on Pocahontas County. Locals spoke of it in half-truths, lowering their voices as if the very mention of the place might draw its attention. The cabin comes and goes. One man told me at a gas station outside Marlinton. You see it when it wants to be seen. Folks who go in don't always come out. His words weren't meant as a joke, and his serious, weathered expression left me unsettled long before my trip into those misty West Virginia mountains. My name is Daniel Morris. I'm a 34-year-old surveyor from Charleston, contracted to chart a section of forest near Cranberry Glades in the early autumn of 2019. My work was straightforward: measure land boundaries, document natural obstacles, and report anything of interest to the state. What wasn't straightforward was the way people reacted when I mentioned my assignment. Their eyes shifted, their mouths tightened, and more than once, someone muttered, "Watch yourself out there." I brushed it off. Appalachia is full of superstitions, and I'd grown used to the stories. Mothmen, coal mine ghosts, witches in the hollows. They were tales meant to spook children and outsiders. But Pocahontas County had a different feel the moment I crossed its boundary. The air was heavier, the forest older, the silence pressing in like a weight against my skin. On my second day in the woods, I came across something my map didn't mark. It was a trail narrow, almost hidden by ferns and fallen leaves, but unmistakably carved by human feet. The strangest thing was how fresh it looked, like people had walked it recently despite the overgrowth around it. My curiosity outweighed my caution, so I followed it. The trail wound deeper into the forest than I expected, curving through thick groves of spruce and poplar, until suddenly the trees opened up into a clearing I swear hadn't been there moments before. In the center stood a cabin. It was small, one story, with weathered logs and a sagging porch roof. Smoke drifted faintly from a stone chimney, though I heard no sound and smelled no fire. I stood at the tree line, staring, my gut twisting in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the strangeness of finding an unmarked structure. It was the way the cabin seemed both solid and hazy, as if the edges of its walls flickered against the sunlight. I called out, "Hello?" my voice sounding foreign against the stillness. No one answered. Against my better judgment, I stepped into the clearing. The air felt colder the moment I left the trees. I remember the sharp scent of damp wood and earth, but underneath it there was something else, an acrid smell, like rust or blood. The porch creaked when I placed my boot on it, though the boards didn't give. I pushed the door, and it opened with a groan. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. A single chair sat in the corner, a table against the far wall, and a bed frame without a mattress. The place was bare, yet there were impressions like something had once sat on the table, or someone had recently used the chair. What unsettled me most was a journal lying open on the floor. Its cover was cracked leather, its pages yellowed. I bent down, picked it up, and began to read. The handwriting was jagged, rushed, and the words told of strange occurrences. I cannot find the path back. Voices whisper outside the door at night. The cabin moves. I woke to a different clearing than the one I slept in. The last entry was smeared, but I could make out enough. If anyone finds this, do not stay. Do not sleep here. It will not let you leave. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. My hands shook as I closed the journal, and I realized how unnervingly quiet the forest had become. No birds, no insects, just silence pressing against the windows and walls. I bolted. I shoved the journal back where I found it and hurried outside, half expecting someone or something to be waiting for me. But the clearing was empty, still as death. I forced myself back onto the trail, moving quickly, not daring to look behind me. It wasn't until I reached my truck that I let myself breathe. I turned, expecting to see the faint rise of smoke from the chimney in the distance, but there was nothing. The forest behind me looked untouched, unbroken by any clearing. My stomach dropped. That night, at the motel in Marlinton, I couldn't shake the image of the cabin. Against every ounce of reason, I convinced myself to return the next day. Call it professional curiosity, or maybe the irrational pull of something forbidden, but I needed to see if it was still there. The next morning, I hiked the same section of forest, searching for the hidden trail. Hours passed, and I found nothing. The land was seamless, a thick tangle of trees and brush, with no hint of a path. I told myself I'd imagined it, that fatigue and the strange reputation of the county had tricked me. But that night, just before sleep pulled me under, I heard it. A knock, 3 slow raps against my motel door. When I opened it, no one was there. Only the sound of the wind, carrying with it a faint smell of wood smoke. Over the next days, I grew obsessed. I searched different sections of the forest, drawn deeper each time, but the cabin never revealed itself again. Locals gave me wary looks when I asked about it, though one old woman finally spoke. "You don't go looking for it," she said, her voice trembling. "That cabin belongs to the mountain. Folks who find it are chosen, and those who go inside don't always come back the same, if they come back at all." I left Pocahontas County not long after, my work unfinished. The forest seemed to watch me as I drove away, the peaks of the Appalachians disappearing in my rearview mirror. I've tried to put it out of my mind, to convince myself it was just an illusion, a trick of fatigue and fear. But sometimes, late at night, when my house is quiet and the world is still, I catch the faintest whiff of smoke, mixed with that metallic tang of rust and blood. And sometimes I dream. I dream of standing in that clearing, the cabin waiting for me with its sagging roof and dark doorway. In the dream, I always open the door. And in the dream, there is always someone inside. I wake drenched in sweat, the sound of my heart pounding light footsteps on an old wooden floor. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed longer that first day, if I dared to sleep inside that cursed place. But I know this. The cabin is still out there, hidden in those endless woods, waiting for the next person curious or unlucky enough to find it. And if you ever wander into Pocahontas County, into those ancient forests where the air grows thick and the silence swallows you whole, if you find yourself on a trail that isn't on your map, leading to a clearing that shouldn't exist, remember this. Turn back, because once you see the cabin, it already sees you. They told me never to go near the tree at night. That was the first rule, whispered by the old men at the gas station when they saw the forestry badge on my jacket. The second rule was never to touch it, no matter how curious I got. I laughed at both, chalking it up to mountain superstition. But those warnings keep clawing back at me now, every time I close my eyes. My name is Thomas Reid. I'm a forest ranger assigned to Harlan County, Kentucky, and I thought I knew these mountains. I thought I knew the woods. I was wrong. The oak was infamous long before I got here. Locals call it the Demon Oak, a gnarled black tree that squats in a clearing halfway up Pine Mountain. The trunk is twisted unnaturally, almost like a body frozen in agony. and its branches claw at the sky in shapes that don't look right, like skeletal fingers reaching to drag something down. They say it doesn't lose its leaves even in winter, though the leaves are the color of rust and seem to bleed into the soil. When I first saw it during daylight hours, I felt a pang of unease I couldn't explain. The bark was dark, almost charred, and the air around it smelled faintly metallic, like old blood. Legends cling to the oak like vines. Some folks say it grew from the site of a hanging, where a man accused of witchcraft cursed the land with his dying breath. Others claim a demon itself was bound there by Cherokee shamans, sealed inside the roots for eternity. Hunters tell stories of hearing screams in the clearing at night, or seeing faces in the bark, mouths open wide in silent terror. Most people around here just avoid it. But me? I had to patrol the land. It was my job. And I told myself I didn't believe in curses. It was early November, the air sharp with the bite of winter, when I first had to camp near the oak. My radio had been spotty, and I needed to check for illegal logging deep on the ridge. I figured I'd set up camp for the night rather than risk stumbling down steep trails in the dark. I pitched my small tent about 50 yards from the tree, just far enough that I wouldn't have to look at it while I cooked dinner. The forest was eerily quiet. No wind, no owls, no crunch of deer in the underbrush. Only the faint crackle of my campfire and the smell of pine smoke kept me anchored. As night fell, I heard it. A low groaning sound, deep and resonant, like wood splitting under pressure. At first I thought it was a branch straining in the cold, but the sound didn't fade. It rose and fell like breathing, like something alive. My skin prickled, and I tried to focus on my pot of beans heating on the fire. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't just wood smoke anymore. It was sulfur, sharp and choking, cutting into the back of my throat. My stomach tightened. I turned and stared toward the oak, black against the dim starlight. Its branches seemed to shift, curling downward like they were bending closer. I told myself it was my imagination, nerves playing tricks in the dark. I climbed into my tent and zipped it shut, wrapping myself in the sleeping bag. The ground was cold and damp, smelling of moss and something fouler beneath it, something rotten. I drifted on the edge of sleep until I heard the whisper. It was faint, almost too soft to notice. My name, Thomas. My eyes snapped open. I held my breath, waiting. Leaves rustled, though there was no wind. Then again, clearer this time. Thomas. The voice was dry, brittle, like the crackle of dead leaves underfoot, but it was unmistakable. It was coming from the direction of the oak. I froze, every muscle tight. I told myself not to move, not to respond. My throat was dry, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Then something brushed the side of the tent. A dragging sound, like fingers tracing the nylon. My breath hitched. I fumbled for my flashlight, hands trembling, and flicked it on. The beam cut across the fabric empty, nothing there. I swallowed hard, and against all reason, against every warning I'd been given, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The clearing was bathed in a thin wash of moonlight. My fire had died to embers, glowing faintly red. The oak loomed like a black silhouette, its bark catching the light in ridges and grooves that looked disturbingly like a face. And I swear, for the briefest moment, I saw eyes glinting in the bark, two hollow pits staring straight at me. The whisper came again, louder now. Thomas, come closer. I should have run. God knows I should have. But something pulled at me, a tug in my chest, like invisible strings. My legs moved without permission, carrying me across the clearing. The closer I got, the thicker the air became, heavy with the stink of sulfur and rot. My flashlight flickered, then went out completely, leaving only the pale moonlight. The bark writhed. I saw it, I swear to you. Patterns in the wood shifting like muscles beneath skin. A knot twisted into the shape of the screaming mouth. eyes opening wide around it. And then I felt the ground beneath me pulse, as though the roots of the oak were a heartbeat, thrumming in the earth, sending vibrations up through my boots. My stomach churned. "Touch me," the voice hissed, louder now, urgent. The branches above creaked, lowering like arms reaching. I raised my hand before I even realized it, trembling, inches from the bark. The wood seemed to breathe, warm air puffing against my palm. And just as my fingertips brushed it, something cold and sharp stabbed into me like claws raking across my mind, not my skin. Images burst into my head. Fire consuming a village, men screaming as shadows dragged them into the roots of the earth, faces twisted in agony, frozen in the wood. My own reflection warped into the bark, my mouth wide in a scream I hadn't made yet. I stumbled back, clutching my head, gasping for air. The tree groaned, the sound deafening, like a chorus of tortured voices. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, not caring where the trail was, just desperate to get away. Behind me, I swear I heard laughter low, guttural, echoing across the ridge. I don't remember how I made it down the mountain. My legs carried me blindly until I saw the faint glow of headlights on a back road. A farmer found me stumbling along the ditch at dawn, pale, trembling, unable to speak more than a few broken words. He drove me into town, and I sat there in silence as the sun rose, feeling its warmth, yet still cold to the bone. I filed no report about that night. What could I say? That the tree spoke to me? That it almost took me? Instead, I told my supervisor the trail was unsafe, the area too unstable to patrol alone. He didn't argue. Too many rangers had quit after assignments near Pine Mountain anyway. It's been 6 months, but I can't escape it. At night, when the wind rattles branches outside my window, I hear my name whispered. Sometimes in the corner of my eye, I swear I see the shape of a twisted oak standing where no tree should be. I keep the lights on. I drink to silence the voices, but nothing works. The demon oak is alive. It's hungry. And I think when I touched it, when I let it inside my head, it marked me. Maybe it's waiting. Maybe it's patient. But I know this much. When the time comes, when I finally can't fight it anymore, my face will join the others in that cursed bark, another mouth open in eternal screaming. And the oak will keep growing. My name is Daniel Hayes, and I've lived in Virginia for most of my 37 years. I work as a surveyor, which means I spend a lot of time in remote places most people never set foot in, mapping ridges, marking boundaries, and sometimes just walking until the world feels like it's forgotten me. I've always loved the Appalachian Mountains, especially the stretch around Big Stone Gap. The forests there breathe with an old weight, older than any of us, and if you're quiet long enough, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the land itself. But after what happened last fall, I can't think of those mountains the same way. I still can't sleep through the night without hearing that awful sound, soft, broken, and endless. It started on a chilly October morning. I had been hired to do a survey on a property that extended up into one of the ridges near Big Stone Gap. The locals warned me before I went. Not directly, not in the way people in cities warn you about traffic or bad neighborhoods. Their warnings came in half smiles and narrowed eyes, with voices that trailed off as though they didn't want to say too much. Stay out of the woods after dark, one older man at the diner told me. When I asked why, he just stirred his coffee and muttered, "Some sounds you don't want to follow." I laughed it off. I've heard old mountain superstitions all my life, but I should have listened. The trail up the ridge was narrow, lined with maples already shedding orange leaves that clung weakly to my boots. The air smelled of damp earth and distant wood smoke from chimneys in the town below. The higher I climbed, the quieter it got. No birds, no rustling squirrels, just the sound of my breath and the crunch of leaves underfoot. I remember stopping once, just to take in how still everything was. That's when I first thought I heard it, faint, like a whimper carried by the wind. I shook my head, told myself it was just a trick of the valley carrying some sound from far off. But my skin prickled in a way I couldn't explain. By late afternoon, I had marked the property boundaries. The sun was already sinking behind the ridges, bleeding the sky with red light that made the trees look like they were on fire. I should have gone straight down, but the ridge curved, and I thought I could save time by cutting across a hollow I didn't know well. That was my first mistake. The hollow was deep, choked with laurel thickets, and as soon as I descended, the air grew damp and heavy, almost suffocating. That's when I heard it again clear this time. A woman crying. It wasn't the kind of crying you hear when someone's frustrated or angry. This was raw grief, broken sobs echoing through the hollow, the sound of someone who had lost everything. My stomach knotted. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but another part of me, stubborn, foolish, wanted to know if someone was hurt. I called out, "Hello? Do you need help?" My voice cracked against the silence. The crying stopped instantly. The hollow went dead silent, and in that silence, I felt watched. My throat tightened. I forced myself forward, pushing through the laurel. The sobbing began again, softer now, almost coaxing. Each time I stepped, it seemed to drift further away, always just beyond sight. My flashlight beam caught rocks slick with moss, roots twisting like grasping fingers. The crying grew sharper, closer, then distant again, bouncing around the hollow in ways that didn't make sense. I called out again, louder, but the sound didn't answer. It just wept. There's an old legend in Big Stone Gap, one I had half forgotten until that moment. The crying woman, supposedly, a young bride in the 1800s, lived in a cabin on the ridge. Her husband was a miner who never came home one night after a collapse. She wandered into the mountains searching for him and was never seen again. Locals say her spirit still roams the hollows, crying for a man who never returns. They say if you follow her voice, you'll never come back either. I'd always thought it was just a story to keep kids from wandering too far. But now that voice was here, and it was leading me deeper. The smell hit me, then damp earth, mixed with something sour, like rot. My stomach turned. My flashlight flickered, and in the dim glow, I thought I saw movement between the trees. A pale blur, low to the ground. My pulse hammered as I swung the beam, but there was nothing. Only branches dripping with mist. The crying swelled again, sharper now, as if the woman was right behind me. I spun around, the light trembling in my hand. Nothing but shadows. I don't know why I didn't run. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear rooting me in place. My boots slipped on the wet rocks as I pressed forward. The hollow narrowed into a gorge, stone walls rising on either side. The sound bounced between them, disorienting, like it was above me, then below, then inside my own head. My ears rang, my chest tightened. "Where are you?" I shouted, half angry, half terrified. And then I saw her. At the far end of the gorge, barely visible through the mist, stood a figure in white. She was hunched, her long hair tangled and matted across her face. Her hands covered her eyes, shoulders shaking with sobs. For a moment, I almost believed she was just a lost woman, stranded in the woods. My heart twisted with pity. I stepped forward. She lowered her hands. Her face was wrong, pale as bone, skin stretched thin over hollow cheeks. Her eyes nothing but dark pits that wept streams of shadow. Her mouth opened in a soundless scream, yet the crying roared all around me, deafening, crushing. My legs gave out. I fell hard onto the wet leaves, my flashlight clattering away. In the dark, the sobbing grew unbearable, as if dozens of voices were crying with her. Cold fingers brushed my arm clammy, weightless. I scrambled back, clawing through the undergrowth. Branches tore at my jacket, stones bruised my knees, but I didn't care. I just needed out. The crying followed, never fading, chasing me up the hollow like a wave. I burst onto the ridge trail, gasping, my lungs burning. The sound stopped, just like that, gone. I ran the whole way down, not stopping until I saw the glow of town lights below. My body shook so badly, I could barely hold my keys when I got to my truck. That night, I locked every door and left the lights on, but it didn't help. When I finally closed my eyes, I heard her again, faintly, like she was just outside my window. It's been months now. People tell me I look tired, and I guess I do. I haven't gone back up the ridge, and I never will. But sometimes, even here in my apartment, I'll hear it. A soft, broken sob, drifting through the night. No matter how many times I tell myself it's just the wind, my blood runs cold. Because I know that sound. The crying woman of Big Stone Gap isn't just a story. She's real. And once you hear her voice, you'll never be free of it.